Convening the previously recessed hearing. As a reminder, members should limit their remarks to the allotted 5 minutes. With that, I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. And Secretary Buttigieg, I'm hearing from constituents that they are concerned about a potential port strike across the entire East and Gulf Coast ports if a contract agreement is not reached by September 30th. This will be devastating for Arkansas businesses that rely on the ports to move their import and exports to customers. We're 90 days out, and I've learned that the negotiations have been called off. This is alarming, and it's up to the Biden administration to bring the parties back to the table to avert this economic catastrophe in September. What are your plans to make sure a port strike doesn't happen?
Thank you. Yes, this is something we are monitoring closely, and our message to the parties is that it is vital that they come together and arrive at a deal that does right by port workers and allows port operations to flow. We had a similar level of intense negotiations around the West Coast ports with ILWU. That came to a successful conclusion. Our hope is that the same will take place with ILA, and I'm in frequent discussion with the Acting Secretary of Labor and other administration members on what we can do to urge the parties.
You're optimistic there's not going to be a shutdown, because people have to plan way in advance for alternate routes and things. So,
yeah, we can't speak for the parties, but of course we are urging them to get to a deal before that September 30th date.
Good. So earlier this year, the Federal Highway Administration issued a proposed rule that would waive federal regulations governing the procurement and administration of engineering and design services by local governments. Now, I've heard serious concerns from engineering companies about the potential impact of this change, which could undermine the long-standing and successful qualifications-based selection process that has been the federal standard for decades. I appreciate the department's interest in easing administrative burdens on local governments that receive federal grants, but as a professional engineer, and I think maybe the only one in Congress, I'm concerned about the potential drawbacks of this particular proposal. Studies have shown that hiring most qualified engineering companies saves time and money and results in better projects and more satisfied owners. The QBS method also gives small and minority-owned firms an even playing field to compete based on their specific proficiencies. It's my understanding that more than 740 public comments were filed in nearly unanimous opposition to the FHWA proposal. Can you please ensure that the administration will carefully consider the views of the engineering community and the potential negative impact of the proposed rule on public safety and project cost?
Yes, I'll take care to look into that, and we want to make sure that anything we do that affects the relationships with the engineering community is responsible and conducive to good, effective, safe project delivery.
And I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about carbon emissions, carbon reductions. I know that's something that you care about. And can you tell us what percentage of the world's carbon emissions does the U.S. produce?
I think it's less than a fifth, depending how you count it, of which the single biggest economic sector is transportation.
Right. So the government data says 13.49, 13.5% is from the U.S. And like you said, the biggest sector is transportation. What's the percentage of that?
I don't have that off the top of my head.
29%. So if we take 29% of 13.5%, that gets us down to between 3 and 4% of global emissions come from U.S. transportation. What percentage of that is passenger cars and light-duty vehicles?
So I know it's one of the single largest categories. I don't have
about 57% of that. Mm-hmm. So if we take 57% of that second number, we're down around 2%. So if every internal combustion engine vehicle in the United States was magically converted to an EV overnight, what would that say the potential to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions would be?
By that logic, Congressman, none of us should ever vote. We are all doing our part to do something about a global change, and I believe America should lead the world.
I disagree with you on that. We should vote smartly. We should put smart policy in place. And last count, we tried to find the number over 100 20-some-odd billion taxpayer dollars have been put in subsidies for EVs. Now, that's if all the fuel going into these EVs came from non-carbon emitting sources. Do you know how much electricity in the United States comes from non-carbon emitting sources?
Even if all of that electricity came from fossil sources, it would still be cleaner because EV engines are more efficient.
I think you need to go back and look at physics a little bit.
Okay, the
because-
physics, Congressman, are that an EV engine is 90% efficient, where even the best ICE engines are lucky to get to
But
40%.
the plant that made the energy is not 90% efficient, and internal combustion engines are 25 to 30% efficient, but you've got the efficiency of the generating plant plus the losses in transmission, and don't try to make the efficiency argument. The bottom line is,
Well, I'm definitely going to try to make the efficiency argument because I think it's important.
well, use good data if you're going to do that.
Sure, well, the good data is that between the regenerative braking and the 77%
You're talking about once the energy's
you
in
get to
the
about 90%.
once the energy's in the EV. But the bottom line is only 40% of energy in the United States comes from non-carbon emitting sources. So that 2%, if you can make every vehicle in the United States an EV overnight, you would be less than 0.9% of world's global greenhouse gas emissions. We're creating great turmoil and change in our country with taxpayer dollars that are being spent inefficiently. I'm all for EVs, but let the technology catch up and don't try to ban internal combustion engines at the rate that you're doing. I'm out of time, and yield back and recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, for 5.